Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and here for you folks we have the story of, probably one of the sickest psychos in recent times. Definitely. Actually, you know what? Probably. Scratch that out. On the 13th of November, 2022, there was a horrific crime in the city of Moscow, Idaho. Back when I covered this story once before, a couple of months ago, the who was still unknown at that time. Now, the why is still unknown, but the story of Bryan Kohberger, it just gets, folks, it just gets more disturbing the deeper you get into it. Let's do that right now. Let's give it a go. So the horrific events of the night of November 13th, 2022, they will linger for a long time. That was when an intruder broke into a 3-story house on King Road on the south side of the city of Moscow, home to the University of Idaho. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonclaves, Chapin and Xana Kernodle, all students at the University of Idaho in town, were all viciously and brutally murdered inside that house. Someone crept in the middle of the night between 3 and 5 a.m., armed with a knife. And 2 of the people who also lived in that house, one of them who stayed on the first floor, the other who stayed on the second floor, survived that brutal attack. The killer didn't even go into their bedrooms. Even when one of these survivors was on the same floor of that house as Xana and Ethan slept in, like, their bedroom was just right across the hall. So why didn't the killer go into their rooms also? Well, to get to all that, and just like a little bit more, we gotta get to who got. It took weeks. I mean, for almost 2 months, the police released nearly nothing about who they thought could have actually done this. Who was this, like, sick monster who could have actually gone into that house on King Road and done what had been done. This then started to lead everybody else, including myself, to believe the police themselves didn't know. It seemed like they themselves hadn't got a clue about where to begin. Turns out, though, they had. It all happened pretty suddenly, all leading to one man. And that was Bryan, C stands for words I can't say right now, Kohberger, 28 years of age, and a PhD student at the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Washington State University, less than a 10-minute drive from the University of Idaho. Now, since Bryan Kohberger's arrest, a lot has come out about him, but there's still also, like, a lot. Like a metric shit ton, you might say, that we do not know about this character. See, Bryan, he wasn't much of a presence throughout his life. He was always described as a quiet guy, and why is it always the quiet ones? Even when it's the loud ones, it's the quiet ones. He grew up in the Poconos, Pennsylvania, and he went to Mount Pleasant High School. He then went to DeSales University, a tiny private university in Penn again. Now, apparently at one point he had a brief heroin addiction, but not a whole lot has kind of come out about that. But some said that he spent some time in rehab for a period. Don't really know much about it. Kind of like one of those, like, allegedly, apparently, friends said. A former professor at DeSales called him a brilliant student. In fact, that's one thing that will kind of come up again and again. Like, people would describe Bryan Kohberger as highly intelligent. Okay, so the smart, quiet ones, we gotta start rounding them up. He studied psychology, and then he later did his master's at DeSales University, studying criminal justice. His thesis? It involved questioning people about their thoughts and their feelings while they were committing a crime. I guess he did not want to question anymore. There was only so much theory he could learn about before he needed some real practical experience. While at DeSales, he even posted on the subreddit XCons, asking for participants with his research project, with questions such as, did you prepare for the crime before leaving home? And, how did you leave the scene? Quite literally taking notes. Other students would say he was a normal, albeit quiet guy, with a weird-ass stare. I mean, Manson lamps on this kid to the max. And yeah, awkward. Like they said, hard to carry a conversation with. Like, talking to him, it's like pulling teeth. This guy. But of course, everybody would say, I cannot imagine this guy committing one of the most disturbing crime acts in recent history. Though, I mean, who would say that? Yeah, I can imagine him going to a house and brutally murdering 4 people. During his time at DeSales, he studied under Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a well-renowned criminal psychologist who spent years interviewing and then writing a book about Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. So he would have known quite a lot about these kind of famous serial killers, taken, again, literal notes. And so, then after he graduated with his master's in the summer of 2022, he upped sticks and he moved all the way over to the West Coast. He moved to Pullman, Washington, and there to do his PhD in criminology. So he was there. While he was there, he apparently applied for an internship at the Pullman Police Department. He was also a teaching assistant and an assistant instructor for undergrads. A lot of PhD students tend to be, who are studying criminology, criminal justice, that sort of thing. Apparently, as a TA, bit of a dick. Apparently, he would grade a lot of their assignments. He graded quite harshly, was considered unapproachable. And it seems as his first semester began in October 2022, people said he was grand, other than, the undergrads who said, this guy kind of sucks. But other people said, he was fine, he was gregarious, he was kind of happy to chat, maybe a little bit less awkward than he had been back in PA. Other than that, kind of a regular-ass dude. When it came to studying criminals, though, and classes, he was front and center. Teacher's pad was right there, middle of the class, taking notes. Now, other people who had interacted with him at this time, shortly before the murders, said he could... To the guys, he was fine. To women, again, bit of a dick. He could be very condescending towards women, would talk over them, that sort of thing. Now, apparently this kind of his hatred of women, which, wow. Apparently that stems from when he was in school, like in high school. He used to be a little bit fat, he was a little bit overweight, and he apparently was bullied by girls back in school, and he lost that over one summer. But largely he was a normal guy. All that changed, though, in November 2022. So he was in Pullman, Washington, and obviously the murders happened in Moscow, Idaho, across state borders, but a 10-minute drive away. Both universities very, very close together. So what were Bryan's links to Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan? None. He didn't know any of them personally at all. They were in, Idaho, the University of Idaho. He was in Washington State, so it's not like they would have met through class or anything like that. Although apparently the student populations mingled quite a bit, again, as they were so close. Apparently Bryan himself went to the University of Idaho a couple of times. He was seen at their student union there, but how he would have interacted with the 4 victims, not at all. It has been reported that he slid into one of the victims' DMs. Who that was, we don't know, hasn't been released. Although Kaylee Gonclaves has always been kind of a subject of, rumors and stuff like that, that she was the main victim here. So he slid into her DMs, apparently messaging, "Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you?" Ad nauseum. She never replied. Either she was like, no. Or it just went into, because, she wasn't following him, they would go into her message requests folder, which I didn't even realize was a thing until recently. But on Instagram, he allegedly followed Madison, Xana, and Kaylee. Didn't appear, though, that they had any clue who he was. Apparently, he had photos of one of the victims on his phone, too, likely the person whose DMs he was trying to slide into. Again, which one of the 3 women that was, we don't know, but... likely Kaylee. Maybe. It seems like she had the most social media presence out of the 3 of them. And it seems like what he did was all planned out. The police would say that he had been in the area of King's Road, where the house was, over a dozen times before the murders. He was staking it out. He would drive around the area. He would drive into the street, park, watch the house. Now, that house, it was a party house. There was often student partying goings on, hijinks, student hijinks, all the time. But it's not believed he was seen at any of those parties or went in, but he would have, been able to watch it pretty easily. So, on the night of the murders, and this is early Sunday, November the 13th, everybody was at home in the house by 2 a.m. Xana and Ethan had been to a frat house party, Madison and Kaylee had been out at a bar, and the other 2 roommates home earlier. So by 2, everybody was back at home. At 2:42 a.m., Bryan Kohberger, he left his house in Pullman, driving his car, a car he'd brought with him all the way from Pennsylvania, a white Hyundai Elantra. He left his house and he was driving south from Pullman. Now, Moscow was east of Pullman, but he was driving south, and as he reached the outskirts of Pullman, he turned off his phone. He drove that way, not directly towards where he was going. Why? Why did he take the scenic route? Maybe he thought his phone was still tracking him. Maybe he wanted more time to think about what he was going to do. But he arrived in Moscow at 3:30 a.m. in his Hyundai Elantra. He then proceeded to drive past the house several times, drive up and down that road quite a few times, maybe trying to, I don't know, gather up his balls, thinking about what he was going to do, make sure there's nobody stirring in the house, but the house by this stage was dark. By 4 a.m., everybody in the house was asleep, except for Xana, who got a DoorDash delivery at about 4 a.m. And like, Bryan would have been right outside the house at this point, possibly even making his way into the house. He would have been watching as she opened the door to this food delivery guy. Then, Dylan Mortensen, who was one of the survivors of this house, and she slept on the second floor of the home, the same floor where Xana and Ethan slept. And she said around that time she heard noises on the third floor, the floor above her, where Kaylee and Madison were sleeping. She thought it was Kaylee, perhaps playing with the dog, directly above her. And then she heard somebody whisper, perhaps Kaylee, whisper something like, "There's someone here. Someone was in the house." Now, Xana was still awake at this time. Records show she was on TikTok till about 4:12 a.m. So it was possible, that Xana was the one who said it. Dylan, hearing this, she opened her door to try and peek out. Saw nothing, just pitch black darkness. Dylan went back to bed. Then she thought she heard somebody crying. She thought she heard somebody crying, and then a male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Dylan opened her door for a second time. This time, again, only darkness and silence. Dylan then, soon after, she opened her door for a third time, and this time she saw a figure in the darkness. She saw a male figure dressed in black with a mask covering the mouth and the nose, walking towards her. Now, she just stood there, frozen in shock, and this guy just walked straight by her and out the sliding glass door into the night. Dylan then locked herself in her bedroom. Bryan, he then left the area at high speed, and his phone would reconnect outside of town. Hours later, he came back. At 9 a.m., phone records would show his phone tracked him from Pullman back to Moscow, and he was on the road. He was on King's Road, again parked up outside their house. Why? Was he waiting for the show to begin, for police and everything? Now, the bodies hadn't been discovered, the victims hadn't been discovered by this time. They wouldn't be discovered for another 3 hours. So he was watching the house just there, relishing in what he had done. Or was it because he realized he had forgotten something? Regardless, it doesn't seem like he went back inside. Then, approximately 3 hours later, Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan were found in the house. And Bryan, he went about his normal routine, classes and all that. And he would bring up the murders when chatting with neighbours around him. "Oh yeah, you hear about those murders? It's weird that happened, right? I wonder if they'll catch the guy who did it. Seems like it was a crime of passion to me, but who knows?" Staring at you with the Manson lamps. Others would say, though, he became a lot more quieter. He became a lot more, tired. It seemed like he was having a lot of sleepless nights after the 13th of November. A week after the murders, due to his car being spotted on CCTV, police asked folk to be on the lookout for a white Hyundai Elantra, and nearby police departments to do the same.
Hours worth of security video from that nearby gas station to assist in the investigation.
The white Elantra seen on CCTV around the time of the murders, it didn't have a front license plate, which was required by both Idaho and Washington, but not required by Pennsylvania. Washington State University police found they had 4 white Hyundai Elantras on their campus, one of which brought them to Bryan Kohberger. An officer walked up to the car, had a look at it, he scanned the license plate, which brought up then Bryan Kohberger's, license and registration, and he saw a picture of Bryan Kohberger. Now, Dylan Mortensen would tell the police the person she saw, the figure she saw during those dark hours, he was about 5'10", was athletic build, She couldn't see the mouth or the nose because of the mask, but one thing she said was he had bushy eyebrows. So the Washington State University police officer saw this car doesn't have a front license plate and that the ID looks like a guy who has bushy eyebrows. The police then started looking into him. They got his phone records, seeing him as he became, pretty quickly a person of interest. And then the phone records showed that he'd been in the location of Kings Road approximately 12 times, over 12 times, in the months leading up to the murders. Every time, except for one, it was very late in the evening or very early in the morning when little to no people would have been around. He could have waited there staring at the house as much to his heart's content. And then with the holidays coming up, Bryan wanted to spend it back at home with the fam back in Pennsylvania. So his father flew over to Washington, and together, Bryan and his dad, they would make the road trip back from Washington to Pennsylvania. And in Indiana, police pulled them over.
Hello.
How you doing?
How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay. Cool. Where are you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're standing early.
What's WSU?
Yeah, I go to the university basically. That is watching
So we're, okay, I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University?
Yeah.
And you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
Hours we're driving. Well, almost.
Okay. And what did
Now, by this stage, the FBI, they were tracking him. He was a key person of interest in this case. They were tracking him as he made his way across America. But when he was pulled over, that had nothing to do with the FBI's, interest in him. There was kind of some rumors about that. It wasn't. Indiana police pulled him over simply because he was following another car too closely. They actually pulled him over twice. And so the final piece of the puzzle was what Bryan had left behind in that house during that horrific attack. A tan leather knife sheath. He had left it on the bed, on Madison and Kaylee's bed, beside Madison's body. And on that knife sheet was a button, for clasping it. A man's DNA was found on that button. Bryan likely realized he had left it behind. After the attack, maybe he'd been in such a daze, he'd left behind. The next morning when he went back, maybe he was thinking, he was in the car. He was looking at the house to see if anybody had awoken, if the police were alerted yet. He was probably sitting there, humming and hawing. Shit, should I go back in and get it? Shit, he didn't. And it's a good thing he didn't. On December 27th, with officers following him all the way to his house in Pennsylvania, to the Kohberger family home, they searched through the trash outside his house and they sent some of it back to Idaho to the state lab to be DNA tested. And Bryan Kohberger's DNA from his house in Pennsylvania to that knife sheet
led them to Pennsylvania, near thousands of miles across the country. That's where they found Bryan Christopher Kohberger, the 28-year-old, whose connection to the Palouse here and to this area seems to be that he's a criminology program student. He's a graduate student in the criminology program at Washington State University. There wasn't a whole lot of information, as I said, because of that, but there's a lot of things we do not know. Like, when did Kohberger become a suspect? How long have they been tracking him? What made this arrest possible today? And there were even questions of a motive. But again, none of that information was provided today. When asked if there was anyone else possibly involved in this case, Chief Fry said, "We have an individual in custody who committed these horrible crimes."
Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania on the 30th of December. He was arrested in the dead of night. Bryan Kohberger was, quote, wearing latex medical type gloves, and apparently was taking his personal trash and putting it into separate Ziploc baggies at the time of his arrest. Presumably, he knew they might be tracking him after, maybe after his DNA, so he didn't want to leave any trace of it behind. He would have known his knife sheath had been found, which would have had his DNA on it, and I guess he knew they'd be tracking him down. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and a burglary charge. Since search warrants were carried out on the Kohberger home, over 70 items seized, including black clothing, a gun, some other items including a knife. Bryan has not yet entered a plea, but according to his lawyer, he is eager to be exonerated. Good luck to him on that one. Psych, not really. He will not appear in court until June 2023, when he will enter his plea. The owner of that house at 1122 Kings Road, they donated the house to the university, and that house will now be demolished. So what is Bryan Kohberger up to now? Well, in prison, not a whole lot. He's a vegan, so he eats his rice and beans. He's pretty quiet, keeps to himself. No surprise there. And most recently, the Idaho State Senate brought back firing squad, execution by firing squad. So that's something that Bryan, I mean, obviously it depends on how the trial goes, which, who knows. But that could be something he'll have to look forward to. Give him the blindfold and a cigarette. Go on, up you get against the wall. And apparently in prison, Bryan is obsessed with himself. Really, he watches all the news he can about himself and the case and the goings on. He's mad about it, mad to learn about what he allegedly did. Wink wink, allegedly. I mean, come on. Trying to get all the news coverage he can get his filthy little hands on. Well, and of course, you know, his lawyer said he's an innocent man. He's eager to go to trial so he can be proven guilty, innocent. So, slip there. You know, so maybe he's oh, geez, this is news to me. Now, with the release of these search warrants, there's much more speculation, as to be expected in a case like this. See, one thing interesting is that the search warrants for TikTok, Tinder, and Google for Bryan and the 3 women, but not Ethan, go back to January 2021, which is, as I'm sure you can count, almost 2 years before the attack. So like, why go back, you know, that far? Did he meet them on a trip to the area before he moved there? Is that why he moved to the area? Or are the police just making sure, you know, they have their ducks in a row and they don't miss anything? But it has led to rumors that, oh, he knew his victims a long time before. You know, they definitely didn't know him, or it doesn't seem they did, but he knew them, and maybe they had some interaction that they never even thought of, but was a big deal to him and set him off. I mean, the reason he did this seems to be, as we've seen before, he was a psycho. He had wanted to kill someone for a long time, had fantasized about it, always questioned about it, you know, like in his research paper. Oh, what's going through your mind when you're doing these horrific acts? Oh yeah, you know, under the guise of I'm just a psychology student, so yeah, tell me more. Yeah, tell me more. He was probably fascinated with the idea of killing another human being. Why did he pick them? I don't know. Nobody knows. It seemed like he was messaging one of them. Maybe he just randomly stumbled across them. How and why he picked them. It doesn't seem they ever interacted in person. Completely random. But how he linked the Instagram to their actual house, he probably seen it in videos or something. I don't know. Maybe he just became obsessed with someone, one of his victims, who didn't know he even existed. And he went by their place again and again and again and again until one day he had to go inside. He just had to. He needed to know what it actually felt like to do what he had studied for years. And why didn't he kill the 2 survivors, Dylan and Bethany? Maybe he was in a daze after what he had already did. Maybe he didn't even know they were there. Who knows? Bryan ain't sane. Yet, you know, with all the planning and thought he must have put into this, he did a pretty bad job, to be honest. I mean, 1, leaving the sheath there. 2, not doing a very good job of hiding his own physical appearance with just, like, a mask on. 3, the phone switching thing. What? Just leave your phone. Like, folks, if you're ever going to commit a crime, don't. But if you ever do, leave your phone at home. Because switching it off kind of looks just as bad as if you'd actually been there. And then, I mean, he even went back the next day with his phone. And then also driving his own car to the crime scene. I mean, for somebody who had studied this for years, done their undergrad, their master's, and now PhD in criminology, criminal justice, all this kind of stuff, studied, you know, under people who had interviewed serial killers. he did a really poor job on it. But it seems that Bryan Kohberger was only interested in what these people did, not how they got caught. And then he had to do it to 4 incredible young students. You know, he only read the chapters on the killing, not on the catching. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate being here with me, watching this whole video. It really does, as always, guys. It means a lot to me that you're here. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video in a couple of days. But until then, please take care of each other and yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.